Hi, and welcome to another Marketing Meetup podcast. My name's James, and we have just finished with a brilliant chat with three incredible individuals, all in different size companies, all with sales backgrounds, helping marketers understand how to bridge the gap between the campaigns that they run and the sales departments that they need to work with. Now, before we jump into the webinar, I'd love to just say a big shout out to our featured partner of the week, which is Exclaimer. Exclaimer is a tool that manages your email signatures globally across companies. That can be, if you're a really small company, right through to a really big company. And it acts as an additional marketing channel as well. So please do go and check out Exclaimer. They're great people. They've got a great tool. We use it. We think it's fabulous. And I think it will be really helpful for you too. But also a big shout out to Frontify, Sticky Beak, Planable, Cambridge Marketing College, and Redgate Software, who is actually we've got in the call today. We've got someone from their sales team. So yeah, it's a really fascinating talk. I really hope you enjoy it. Make sure to do all the liking and subscribing and all the things that marketers usually ask you to do. Much appreciate any feedback on these sessions, and yeah, we'll bring you some more soon. Enjoy. Well, let's get going. We've got three guests for the price of one today, and just to introduce them separately, our first guest is Mark Barry. Mark is the MD and VP of Sales for EMEA at Hubspot. He's worked in some of the world's most interesting SaaS companies and has seen them through their journeys from scale up to genuine sort of industry leaders. He's also an incredibly talented musician and painfully handsome, so you're going to really enjoy hearing from Mark. Secondly, we have Hannah Hooton, which I haven't said to Hannah before, but I think it's one of my favourite names. What a great name, Hannah Hooton. She's an absolute legend, and she's a long-time member of the community. Hannah's situation is different to Mark's in that she works in an agency called Genie, which is around 50 people, and is the person responsible for bringing in sales with both the marketing and sales hats, which she does a really great job at, by the way. And then finally, a new friend to the community is Jake. Jake is the regional sales director for the US West and Midwest regions at Redgate Software. So he's very early in the morning over in the States right now. He's jacked up on coffee. And he's been part of the Redgate journey for the past 6 years, during which time Redgate has really scaled. I put it all down to the sponsorship of the Marketing Meetup, obviously. But again, another set of experiences, in addition to some really interesting cultural things I think we can learn from being involved in a different market in the States. So you should be able to click on those or scan those QR codes if you want to follow and connect with those guys on LinkedIn, and then you can give them a little thank you afterwards. But I'm going to start with something sort of fairly simple, which relates to when I started out in sales in my 20s. It was in small companies, and I was kind of given the role of marketing and sales. It was lumped together. And what I realized over the years is rarely can it be a silver bullet. Rarely can you just be a salesperson that turns up with a black book and transform the business. You need both. And marketing is also, sometimes going to struggle without a sort of a good sales team there. So this is probably the most basic question, but I think it could be quite illuminating in what you consider the definition of a sales role might be. And if we start off with Mark, what does that mean to you?
Well, hello, James, and hello, everybody. Thanks very much for having me today. I think you underestimate the complexity of that question, or overestimate the simplicity of that question, how to define sales. I think if you'd asked me, I'm trying to think about when my first sales job was in Auto Trader in 1997. If you asked me in 1997 how to define sales, it mostly would have involved words like painful, annoying, difficult. But I think when I think about sales today, And the things that define good sales processes, good sales outcomes, it is the set of skills to discover and connect mutual value for all parties. So you have that idea where you're understanding where the opportunity is, you're connecting the dots between something you have and something somebody else can get value out of, and there is value for everyone in the end of that transaction.
That's lovely, and that feels like a very generous answer as well. That's a salesperson
I'm
thinking
nothing
about.
if not giving,
Yeah,
James.
it's funny because I was told early part of my career that a really good sales director was a selfish person, and I always really struggled with that because I get it, they need to be kind of motivated, but I love the fact that that's a really generous way of thinking. So thank you, Mark. Hannah, you're bridging the gap of sales and marketing. So you kind of got both sides of the table on. What does it mean to you on an individual level?
Thanks, James. And hi, everyone. It's great to be here. It's weird not to be on the other side and like commenting away. I think from my perspective, firstly, I'm the least salesy salesperson you'll probably ever meet. In the sense that when Joseph first asked me if I'd come and join you today, I was thinking, well, I spend most of my time marketing. Like, how dare you consider me a salesperson? But fundamentally, is my role managing the sales process from start to finish? Yes, it is. So I accept that that is a rather large part of my role, and I wouldn't be in it today if I couldn't do it. So I think for me, what is a sales role? It's actually a partnership nowadays. I don't consider it primarily to be uh, I completely agree with what Mark said from a value exchange, like that has to be there. And that's why for me, sales is a partnership. It is two entities, two people, two businesses working together to mutually achieve something that both parties are kind of working towards or need to achieve for their own business objectives. Because we all see enough examples of businesses doing things that don't actually help themselves, and if they're not all working together towards the same business objective and their business objective, then the sales role hasn't been successful.
Yeah, I love that, and I think we'll probably later on dig into how those things are, how you can partner with different parts of the business. But Jake, you're over in the States. Thanks for joining us. You
Hmm.
are pure sales and not a
Yes.
marketer by your own admission. So if you're sort of out with friends explaining, what your role is, what does that look like?
Yep. Yep. Good morning, everyone here from lovely Austin, Texas. I think I might take a much more sort of internal definition of what a sales role, maybe a bit more of a dictionary definition, which is, a company hires salespeople to maximize the growth potential and to grow revenue. And so in sales, we do that generally by interfacing with customers. So if I take a very literal sort of internal corporate perspective of the role, I think it would be that. But the more I think about that definition, the more I realize that there's a lot of people who don't have sales in their title who end up being salespeople, right? The executives at our company, Redgate, end up being salespeople because they interface with customers hoping to find mutual value and hoping to extract value. I think there's actually a lot of marketers at our company who would feel the same. So while it feels quite narrow of a definition, realistically, everyone at a company, big and small, is looking to grow revenue, and so we all participate in sales in some way, shape, or form, I would say.
Yeah, I love that. And I remember years ago being in a pitch, and a designer who was quite a shy guy just started talking really passionately about his part of the business. He was there as the expert, and actually he was probably the best salesperson in the room. And I realized at that point that my job as head of sales was just to bring the experts into the room and make sure that they were delivered. So yeah, I really like that. That's great. Um, so staying with you, Jake, for you, where does marketing kind of stop in your organization and sales begin? And that's a bit of a leading question because it's probably not a hard line. But are there certain responsibilities that you see as shared and certain responsibilities that aren't? I'm just interested to see where the threshold is.
I'm really tempted to not use the word funnel But part of me maybe really wants. Yeah, okay, good. Okay, that's good. That's great. Yeah, I think you could take whatever customer journey, whatever buying journey, whatever funnel that you've got, and you can start to, like you said, there's not a really hard and fast line that says, okay, this is where sales or where marketing ends on that buying journey and where sales begin. There's definitely a gradient there in the middle. But I think, the way that I partner with marketing, the way that I see marketing being really, really valuable for my team is bringing those insights from the market that we in sales might not necessarily gather because we tend to be a bit more micro and a bit more focused on specific customers. So I think in some ways that's where I might potentially draw the line, where for us in sales, we're very much looking at this specific customer, this specific cohort of customers. And for me in the enterprise space, that ends up being quite a small number of customers when we're looking to sell up market. And I hopefully can bring those insights to marketers, but at the same time, like I can tend to have my head sort of close to the ground. And I look at the marketing roles and the marketing functions in our org as bringing insights to me on, hey, these are the elements of our market or our customers in the macro level that you may not be aware of. And that's super valuable. When you get those things kind of working together, you've got something really exciting. So that's one definition I might use off the top of my head now.
Yeah, I love that. And I think so I've written down two things. So one for Hannah and one for Mark. Mark, obviously you're working for Hubspot, which is a very integrated, whether you look at it as customer management or whether you look at it as a sales tool or inbound, outbound, it's all kind of mixed in together. Like, does that really blur the lines between sales and marketing?
Yeah, it does. I think Jake mentioned funnel, the inference whenever you think about funnel is some kind of linear journey, but like that straight, linear path really hasn't been a thing since Google, became prolific, and certainly since social media became prolific. And so, kind of funnel jumping is how people usually find their way to some value. And of course, at HubSpot, we talk about the flywheel. We talk about, attracting customers, engaging customers, and delighting customers. And nominally, you can break those into functions. Marketing attracts customers, sales teams engage customers, customer success teams delight customers. And there's Chelsea raised a comment there saying, I much prefer to think about sales as customer success. Actually, I agree selling should have a degree of customer success involved, but I see those as kind of two separate functional things. But that wheel keeps turning, right? As you attract customers and then you engage them, and then over the life cycle of them being customers, you delight them with more things, and then you re-engage them, re-attract them, find them in other ways. That, the way that buying and consumer behavior works today, and everything from kind of B2B consumer right up to, or sorry, B2C consumer right up to, business to business. Companies are thinking about a lifetime relationship with buyers. They're not thinking about it, I think, as a transaction. And so that kind of funnel idea of attract something, sell something, and then end is outmoded. It's a continuum, I think.
Yeah. And that actually tees me up beautifully for the question that I was going to ask Hannah. Presumably, Hannah, relationships are a huge part of the success of working in an agency. And how does that, do you find that marketing still needs to happen with your current customers? So you've marketed to gain a customer, sales have taken over, they've won. Is there this bit afterwards where you're both kind of playing with I said playing with the customer, but engaging with the customer?
100%. I think in our world, relationship building is what creates sales. If there is no relationship building of any description, then we would have no sales, because our business is based off building, as Mark just said, those long-term relationships. It's based off that ensuring that we have that connection, that engagement with a brand. I think if we switched off the moment it entered the sales process, quite honestly, they probably wouldn't continue talking to us, because the reason they engage with us is to get more than what their account team are doing. The account team delivering is, of course, the most fundamental part as to why they're with us. But we live in a really customer-centric world. And so even though we're, a B2B agency, the customer being first in all of those scenarios means that the customer needs to get exactly what they want. And that isn't always straightforward account management for the challenge or the problem that they have in front of them today. It's about pulling in those industry insights. It's about finding the benchmarks. It's about us being there to preempt what we think is going to come next for them. And that isn't necessarily happening in like a weekly client management. That's happening as like a newsletter. That's happening with content we're putting out there, because they want to know that we understand our industry better than anybody else. They want to think that, okay, we're in good hands. We're with people who really, no offense to any PPC people on the call, but like no one wants to know all the ins and outs of how something technically works. They want to rely in our world on the agency to know that. And therefore, we have to constantly prove that we do know that and that we're ahead of it in order to be able to deliver. And I think if they didn't see that, they might question us more. The conversation, the relationship wouldn't be as healthy as we would like.
And like from personal experience, having worked in a similar sort of size agency to yourself, I always used to see it when customers came into the building. It was like one of the most exciting parts of their week. They weren't necessarily marketers themselves. They might be business owners, but coming in and talking to a marketing agency about new stuff, it was really exciting. And so, yeah, I think keeping that level of excitement there is key. I'm intrigued to know, and feel free to shout your favorites out, but have you ever seen sort of really successful ways that salespeople have sort of fed information back to marketers, and have you worked with particularly good marketers in the past that have done certain things? And maybe start with you, Jake. Have you got a marketer on your team that you're like, yes, that guy or gal is my go-to, or have you found that by feeding certain stuff back that you've had real success?
I think one thing that I can be really honest about as a salesperson is that we tend to be prisoners of the moment in some way. So we get off a customer call, we hear something described in a certain way from that customer's POV, and that feels like the most important thing in that moment, where that could just be sort of short-term mindset. So I think the best marketers that I've worked with, they're very willing to listen as that feedback sort of organically comes through, and sometimes comes through in fits and spurts depending on what's going on and at any given moment. But I think the best marketers that I've worked with are the ones that are able to really contextualize that, right? They're able to take that feedback and say, okay, I might not, take immediate action on this, but I'm definitely going to listen to this, and I'm definitely going to apply what I'm hearing you say to everything else that I'm hearing, and see, and tailor some kind of insight for you. So again, maybe this isn't really fair, but oftentimes I lean on our marketing resources to be the folks that will listen to me or my rep sort of ramble on about something and say, okay, this is what I actually heard you say. This is how I think this applies in this context, and this is what we're going to do about it. And I think we have a regional marketing team here at Redgate. So we're a UK-based company. I'm here in the US, obviously working with these US customers, but we have US marketers here working with our US sales teams. And I think they do a really, really, really great job of this. And we don't make it easy on them, but that's definitely one of the big value adds.
That's really interesting. And do you find a difference between your US sales and US marketing team and the UK and sales and marketing teams? Like, do they do the same thing, i.e. listen, but then have to come up with completely different sort of regionalized approaches?
100%. And I think that's the big challenge for, I think, a company the size of Redgate, and how we want to scale going forward. We have we obviously need to have a standardized message, how we're approaching the global market and how we want everyone to think of us, but we have to be really agile in these regions. Going into the US market is going to be very, very different than going into, the European market or the East Asian market, right? The maturity or their propensity to buy your products, and on top of all the localization stuff. So I think we're on that journey now as we scale globally and trying to figure out how do we take the standardized company message, but make sure it gets applied to these markets. And look, I'll be honest, it's really challenging. But getting that right is really satisfying, and I think it's an important lever for growth.
Yeah, that's really cool. Okay, so Mark, you've got a bunch of experience in, from, as I said at the beginning, from scale up to sort of big companies like HubSpot. There's a lot of terms and a lot of things that create pressure in a salesperson's life, whether that's leads, revenue, profit. What are the main things that marketers need to be most aware of in a salesperson's job, do you think, that's going to create empathy between the two?
I think you covered quite a few of them, just even with some of those headlines. The job, I mean, aside from philosophically, my aspiration is all salespeople that, work in our organization, think of the customer first, they think of the company next, they think of themselves next after that. That they're putting their best foot forward and doing their very best work, and they're here to learn and do the best work of their career. And it's important, I think, to have those aspirations. At the end of the day, though, that person also carries a target. They're getting paid on that target. How they fulfill that target will be through a combination of leads that are created by demand sources like marketing or partners or maybe a business development team, and also leads that they generate for themselves. And I think just for marketers to understand, okay, well, how does a salesperson or a sales team be successful? And if part of their success is attracting customers, for them to serve, are we looking at the same things? Are we looking at customers in the same way? Are we telling the same story as we go out to those customers? And I think there are these are really simple shortcuts. It doesn't matter the size of your organization, whether you are the sole marketeer in your company or you're a product marketer in a 500-person marketing organization that also has regional marketing, customer marketing, partner marketing, etc. The shortcut to knowing not just how to help sales. Helping sales is a shorthand for helping customers. The shortcut to do that is, number one, talk to customers. So actually make time in your calendar every week to talk to customers. That could be, events that you attend. It could be calls that you set up with existing customers. It could be calls that you set up with prospects that the company lost, and understand what it is that those customers and prospects actually care about. And the second shortcut, which is also really easy, is go to a sales forecast meeting and be part of that meeting every week. And again, most sales organizations, the sales part of that organization will have a forecasting rhythm, because that's how they, structure the governance around the business. That's how they understand how much money they're going to make. It's how they understand how many customers they have, or how many customers they're winning, how many customers they're losing. Marketing is a critical component to that story, and marketing can learn a ton of, how the business is operating just by being part of that meeting. So talk to customers, go to sales forecast meetings.
I love that. And apologies if my mic's, is that better if I move my mic a little bit closer? I'm a bit quiet apparently. I really love that. It's sort of giving people a seat at the table. Marketers actually being in a room where they're not just talking about marketing is so important. And it's something that
I will say it's not like a seat, in the corner observing. It's a hot seat.
Yeah.
But there's no and you know, again, Jake and Hannah might, you know, this might resonate with you guys as well. There's nothing worse, I think, as a stakeholder, you know, finding out from some other stakeholder that you're letting the side down, or you're not delivering the thing that you're supposed to deliver. But how can you know that if you're not part of the conversation, you know? And so being part of the conversation in the first place, you know, shortcuts some of those frictions and frustrations, and then everybody can do better work together.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's so hard for marketers to sort of sit outside of those big meetings, if you like, and then come in with an idea just to present your idea and then disappear again, because you're missing out on the context in which you're trying to, of the problems you're trying to solve. Hannah, is that something that happens within, you know, I mean, obviously you've got sales and marketing for yourself, but presumably you're looking at sales targets and then sort of looking backwards again, right? How can we improve those through marketing? Is that, presumably you already have that seat, and that's quite important?
100%, but I think that there's a couple of important pieces. The first one is around we have a finite resource. We're an SME, you know, we're not a business that is able to pull in resource from all over the place. Therefore, we have X amount of resource at any period, and we can only sell as much as the resource we have. And realistically, you know, it feels like at the moment we look at that all the time, but in less busy periods, you know, we might look at that on a monthly basis, we might look on that a quarterly basis, to forecast, to understand what resource is it that we need down the line. And realistically, our marketing has to ensure it delivers that. You know, over the last couple of years, I think a lot of agencies will say that it's been quite a rocky time, it's been quite challenging, and therefore everything we've done as a business has focused on demand. It's focused on driving as much demand as we can. We've now reached the point where we have too much demand, that resource is now the challenge. And therefore, we've now got to flip things on their head and almost not slow the sales pipeline down, because we definitely don't ever want to do that. That's the salesperson's worst nightmare. But we've got to manage it, and we've got to make sure that when we get to the end of this period, and what we've recruited and our resources back up, that we can continue to move that wheel, and we can continue to go along. And so I think that's a really important one for us to have as an entire team. That's not just sales, that's not just marketing, that is, everybody has to work together on it. And I think the other element is, when I look at, you know, what our sales function is, if you like, it is effectively, we are just starting that relationship. You know, the salesperson is in on that customer's journey for a very short period of their lifetime with us. And therefore, my job is to amplify the team. It's not about me as a salesperson. My job is to, you articulated it quite well earlier, actually, when you said you're not the expert in the room. I'm never the expert in the room, and I'm quite happy with that. I can default to the experts in the room for them to have that voice. And I think while I can tell you what we can do, I'm a glorified project manager, right? I can tell you what we can do within that time, but fundamentally, this is the team that's going to deliver it for you. And actually, that's the team that you need to hear from and build that long-term relationship with. I'm always there if you've got a problem, but why talk to me when you can talk directly to them?
Yeah. And I think it's probably as a 2 or 3 person business, you are sales, marketing, and the expert. But as these things start to scale, so that salesperson becomes less of an expert and more of a this is what my team's telling me type of thing. Yeah, that's super interesting. On the sort of on the terms that we were sort of touched on earlier, Jake, the things like profit and revenue and net profit, gross profit, all those sort of things. Do you find that there's certain things that marketers don't always grasp, and ones that you think are really, really important terms, sort of whether it's acronyms, or like we're classic in marketing for chucking an acronym around. But are there things that that you think would really help from a sales point of view, you know, that a lay person might not necessarily know about in sales?
I think less so some of those financial terms that you mentioned there. I think I think most companies, maybe not startups necessarily. Startups are just getting their heads around this, but certainly mid-size and larger companies, most sales forces work within a qualification mechanism or a qualification model. So this is a model that salespeople use when they're actually interfacing with customers to, qualify that customer and see if they're a good fit to purchase the product and to go through a selling motion or a buyer's journey. And so there's loads of these out there. There's, way back when there was an acronym called BANT, which has sort of come out of favor now. I think what's really popular is the MEDPIC or MEDIC methodology, which is something that we use here at Redgate. And these are just acronyms. I'm not going to explain them all. You can go and look them up. But I think that is one of the best ways for a marketer to crawl inside the head of a salesperson and really get a sense from what they're doing day to day, is to get a sense of how that salesperson is trying to qualify, what that salesperson's definition of a qualified customer is. And again, a lot of companies have this defined for their sales orgs. And it's a methodology that's standardized across the teams. I think that's been really, really helpful for the alignment between those two functions here at Redgate, is making sure that we're clear with each other on this is what we think a good customer is when it reaches that stage of the funnel.
Yeah. And have there been points, Jake, that so obviously you've been with the company for quite a number of years. Did you see like a big as the company grew, did you see a big sort of shift in the way that in terms of the dial, in terms of how sales and marketing work together from like the early days to where you are now? Is there anything that kind of that stood out?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think when I started at Redgate, we had, our go-to-market teams were pretty simple, if I'm being honest. I was an entry-level salesperson, and I had leads, and there was a report in our CRM for leads, and I called those leads, and hopefully I could sell them software. And we had a marketing team that hopefully generated a bunch of leads. Now, there's so much technology available to us, and there's so many different ways to qualify a lead, that things have certainly gotten more complex. I think for the better, though. And especially as Redgate as a company, we view our growth not just as selling as much software to as many people as possible, although that is the goal. Now we view our growth through the lens of, okay, how do we penetrate this market? Or how do we approach this cohort of customers? How do we grow in the mid-market? How do we grow in the enterprise? And so I think when you talk about those dials, I think we've moved from maybe 1 or 2 dials to, 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 or 8. And that, I think we've gone through some growing pains and figuring out, okay, how do we contextualize all of these together? But it sharpens our go-to-market motion for the particular set of customers we're trying to go after. And I think that's been really helpful as we grow.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And so looking at the sort of earlier stages, if you like, with you, Hannah, like in a smaller company, like wearing 2 hats is hard. Like how do you keep the balance between the two? Like there's pressure for both, right? Like what does your sort of typical working week look like, and how do you become not just marketing or not just sales?
I think it is that piece around ensuring that you have demand. It's ensuring that demand is always there and that is always churning, and whether that is through new activity, like we have to have an always on, and it's tried and tested, and we've A/B split, and we've run multiple different campaigns to understand what activity do we need to always run, and therefore we know that will bring in this base level of sales activity, and then as and when required, to the guy's points, we pull the levers when we know that we've got extra resource, when we know we're coming into peak. Like agency world is weird, in paid services is weirdly very seasonal, and therefore we know when we need to be not doubling down on sales, because it's not doubling down, but I know when I'm going to have the majority of my week bookmarked to pitches, to sales, to working on that side of things versus the marketing. And therefore it's rather than a weekly basis, it's more managing your calendar on a like seasonal basis, a monthly basis, to be like, okay, it's now the summer holidays. Salespeople hate the summer holidays because everyone goes on holiday and everything pauses. What can I do in this time period to maximize my time, and make sure that we have everything planned and scheduled for the next 3 months? Because all of a sudden everyone's going to come back from holiday, they're going to realize we're in peak, and they're going to freak out, and I'm going to get loads of phone calls. Yeah. That's not being arrogant, that is just the nature of the sales cycle, and therefore we need to make sure that we've got those things. So it's not necessarily like managing them on a daily basis, but inevitably cash is king.
Yeah.
So,
and it's one of those things, like when I first started my own agency, it was like you win 2 or 3 customers, you're like, yay, brilliant, I'm really good at that. Now I'm going to be an operator, or I'm going to, and you sometimes forget that actually some of those customers could disappear, and you need some more, talking about going back to the funnel, it's always having your eye on the next lot coming in to make sure that you've got somebody to slot in as your next customer, sort of thing. So yeah, super interesting. And then one more question to you, Mark, before we go. We've got a bunch of questions in the Q&A. You've worked in some of the most successful companies, and what sort of characteristics, what has characterized some of the best sort of sales operations and sales people that you've been around as the North Star of where everybody wants to get when they all get to the size of HubSpot?
I think so. Characteristics of really great salespeople.
Yeah.
I think that, the idea that sales is innate and, finger guns, you either have it or you don't, like, that's rubbish. It's a skill. It can be taught, it can be mastered, and it can be developed. And you're continually learning and reskilling and developing and adapting to different situations. Also, by the way, every single person, no matter what you do in life, you're always selling something to somebody. You're selling, I had to, sell the idea to my kids to wash the dishes last night, in exchange for something else. So that kind of making a connection and describing value, that is the innate thing. But the skill that comes around selling to people, where previously, and my career is long enough to know that, okay, here's the playbook of how you start a conversation where you want to sell somebody and you go to this next stage and this next stage. Jake mentioned earlier the buyer journey. We need to stop kidding ourselves that actually it's not about what we want to sell, it's what people want to buy, and so the best salespeople are those, in my view, are those that are willing to adapt, that are lifelong learners, voracious learners, actually, where they always want to learn new stuff and do new stuff, and have that kind of intellectual curiosity again about somebody else's challenges, not just their own challenges. The kind of coin operated salesperson is a thing, but it's not the most successful example of modern selling in my view. I think when it comes to structuring sales, back to that idea that you don't just happen into sales. And sorry, I should say, don't get me wrong, like when I started at Stripe, the sales team at Stripe was, a handful of folks that had developed out of the customer success or support organization, where people started asking for more stuff and different features, and so we kind of turned some of those folks towards selling. But the best seller in Stripe when I started, by career, was a Michelin star chef. This is not like somebody who went into a sales career. They just kind of grew up into it. But at a certain point, you have to get to having structure, having rigor, having enablement, like a sales methodology. Again, Jake mentioned earlier, like a governance around forecasting. Those are the kind of things that, again, sound quite drastic and quite rigid. And guess what? They are. You need to have some predictability in your sales. And so you balance this kind of intellectual curiosity, creativity, lifelong learning, with the ability to organize oneself around a methodology to run a buying process. Essentially, those, I think, are the characteristics of the more successful sales organizations that I've worked in. And finally, as well, and it probably sounds a little bit cliche, but it has to be fun. Like, it has to be enjoyable. If it's always a slog, and like, it's tough out there, folks, everyone knows it, but if it's always about how tough it is, you lose good people, you lose your own energy. Customers feel that. So, it has to be enjoyable.
I think Hannah's got a point on personality, so I'll come on to you in a second. But just on that point, when I was head of sales, the days where I would always win the big contracts were the ones where I was just being silly with the person that I was with, and we were almost giggling when we came into the room, where we weren't almost taking the situation, too seriously, and though people would see that you were having fun. And I think if you can market yourself as a brand that's enjoying itself, and those bits of communication are that you're having fun, then people want to be part of that journey. But Hannah, you dropped me a message about personality. Like, how do you feel that fits in?
I think Mark's right. Salespeople are humans too. And I think that one of the things that really frustrates me is and it's funny because Joe actually said it on his email about today's event. He said, salespeople, oh, like, it's almost like the moment you hear the sales word, you're like, oh, not sure about them, greasy, slimy car salesman. Like there's almost like a visceral reaction that people have when they hear that. But actually, salespeople are just like everybody else. And I think one of the things that a really good salesperson can do, or that I see from my side, is it's someone who can speak to someone for 15 minutes and understand that person, as in whether it use like an insight profile or a disc profile, like whatever your personality matching scheme is, like being able to identify who it is you're talking to and therefore how they want to be spoken to is like the most important element. And you have to do it quite quickly, and it is a skill that you learn over time. It's definitely not that innate thing that you just wake up one day and you're like, this is what this, like, you have to listen for the key elements. But being able to understand who it is you're talking to and therefore how they want to be spoken to is what will either make that conversation a really nice experience for that customer or not such a nice experience, and they'll probably leave and go elsewhere because you've got to get them. And I would say the same privilege should be afforded to sales teams. Just because they are a salesperson does not mean they are a particular type of person. Like, get to know your sales team and actually how is it that they are as individuals, because everybody is motivated by slightly different things.
Yeah, and I love that. And actually, you could have been talking about a marketer there when you're saying like you've got to listen to your customer and you've got to react to the things that they want and position. It's a marketing and it's a sales sort of approach, which I love. So we really should get onto some questions from the community. I've been being very selfish, asking all the ones I wanted to hear. First one that we've got that's had the most upvotes, and make sure in the Q&A, folks, if you go in and give a little thumbs up, we'll answer those ones first. Alice, and I'm going to come to you, Jake, on this one, has said, what annoys you the most about marketing teams? E.g., something you wish they didn't do, did more of, or understood more.
Really on the spot with this one. I think I've referenced this a couple times. I think there's a lot of data that can be used to describe the inputs and outputs of a marketing function. I think I can sit down with some marketing teams and there's just a variety of data points. And I wouldn't say this annoys me per se, but I find the question that I ask most often is, can you contextualize this for me? So there's all this information about what's going well, what's not going well. This is where these customers at, but this is where these, there's lots of, and that's all good stuff. But ultimately, what's most helpful for me is, can we distill that down into something doesn't have to be actionable immediately, but there needs to be a so what statement at some point there. Again, I would not say this annoys me because this is really, really hard. I think this is a challenge, but that is, again, the question that I find myself asking some of these teams the most. Yeah.
I think that's great because we all live in our own world, right? And if a campaign has reached X amount of people and there's like, what does that mean to you as a salesperson? It's like, what do these numbers mean? I think that's a really valuable piece of advice. Thank you for that. We've got a question here from Megan saying, how do you report on campaign attribution / influence? We're currently looking at the best way to do this. Mark, I guess you're the man with the tools. How is that best reported?
I was literally going to say, by the way, we use HubSpot, so I'm going to defer the question to Mark.
Oh, cool. Okay. No pressure.
Yeah, we use HubSpot. I mean, jokes aside, pitch aside, there are tools that do this. I think though, what's really important is that it's an iterative process. Every campaign is going to be different, even if the copy is the same and the audience you think is the same, and maybe the time of year is the same time you ran that same copy last year. There's going to be something that makes it different, and so you need to be really clear on what are the signals that you consider to be important in attributing value. The way that I think about the owner of, if you like, of the customer experience, and as the owner of revenue generation from those, any campaign that we decide to do is an investment. And so I'm instantly going to look for a return on that investment. And I'll have in my head a range at which I think that return on investment is acceptable. And so I might be fine with us, tapping out on ROAS if we are seeing net new audiences coming into the funnel or into the flywheel. Whereas I might not be so prepared to do that if we're already tapped out or saturated in a particular market. So I think don't assume that how you attribute value for every campaign is going to land the same way for whoever is owning the revenue at the end of that.
And I guess there's certain campaigns that will surprise you in terms of their outcomes. So you kind of go, well, the idea was this was going to be an acquisition campaign, but actually it's worked beautifully as a brand campaign, or vice versa. So yeah, that's a great answer. Zara asks, we have a very separate marketing and sales team. Do you have any tips of how we can increase communications between them? I'm probably going to go back to you, Jake, on this one, because you've probably got the most separate, like, are you guys on Slack? Is it weekly emails? Are you in the same room? Like, what's the best way that you think marketers can connect properly with salespeople?
I think of those three things that you mentioned, it's in the reverse order of effectiveness. So Slack is a wonderful tool, especially for geographically dispersed teams. Same with email as needed, but I think we really do find that getting these teams in the room together, talking about the same things together, has a massive impact. It's a really easy answer, maybe a lazy answer in a way. It's like, oh, just get these people together and talk. I think the caveat there is you need a really strong leader. I don't know, a pretty strong leader to facilitate those conversations effectively. But more often than not, finding a mechanism or a medium to bring these teams together and finding ways to make sure that they have mutual interests or shared interests, and having conversations around those, plants the seed and puts fertilizer on the ground that is going to, create some awesome things down the road. So if you can just get that started in that way, I think you'll be surprised at how effective things turn out in the long term.
That. Joe and I went to, we've made a video that's on our YouTube channel where we went and interviewed the head of marketing for Canva in Europe, and she was telling us about how there's a mandatory lunch break in their office where they all have to take lunch, and every day there is a meal cooked from a different country in the world. So there's like an on-site chef there, and everybody comes together and breaks bread and chats. And so you've got all these different departments every day chatting and building friendships and learning from each other. And my hunch is that that's incredibly effective for a company. Certainly as they get bigger, it becomes harder, right? Things become more siloed. But yeah, just sometimes just sitting down and having a cuppa with someone can be really effective, right? So
I think it's pretty critical, actually. Again, in the pre-COVID days, back in my time at Stripe, one of the company was so intentional and so thoughtful about creating connection across all teams that it had physically set up the office in that way. So in the lunchroom, there were no small tables or breakouts. It was all long tables and benches. And so you had to, you kind of potluck who you were sitting next to, and that would create some conversations, and the founders and the exec team and all that would just kind of randomly jump on your table someday and start a conversation. So that was one. The other was all of the teams sat together on, as you know, in most of the offices anyway, they were relatively like open plan. And so all of the teams, the desks were all, in the same area. So I'm sitting next to marketing and there's ops over there and product over there. And even as the company scaled, I joined it when it was 300 people. It was 8,000 people when I left. And as the company scaled, if your team was bigger than 26 people, you had to break up your team and only have that number of people in one location to make sure there was space for other teams to be there as well. So there are like intentional things you do, but the challenge in the hybrid world is like what those kind of physical things allowed was the serendipitous conversations that you don't get when you schedule a marketing meeting or schedule a forecast call or something like that. So you miss all of that serendipity. And so you have to intentionally try and create artificial ways to have serendipitous moments. And so part of it is not, in my view anyway, it's not just about how well we use Slack or how well we use Zoom, but are we creating moments that are not just about the work and maybe just a little bit about learning from each other and meeting other people, lunch and learns, whatever it might be, but creating those social engagements where people just get to, meet and like Hannah, and then maybe be curious to learn more about what Hannah does,
Yeah, exactly that. It's funny. One of our partners, Frontify, we've been building this really lovely relationship with Annika there, and she asked me to be on a panel at an event down in London, and just being in the same room, like I just feel the connection so much stronger now from being able to sort of chat with her and understand her better as a person. Because we have these little windows, don't we, in Zoom meetings where it's like, oh, there's 45 minutes to do everything we need to do. And so, yeah, I think it's great that, you have to find creative ways, don't you, to get in the same room as people. We've only got 6 minutes left. Goodness me. We've got a question from an anonymous person saying, we find it really difficult to get everyone aligned. We have regular communication, but we really struggle to get sales to particularly utilize the information we provide to help really personalize the content. We've tried so many things and never seem to get that alignment. Any tips would be great. I think we're kind of touching on a similar topic here, but specifically the information that's being passed over to personalize content. Hannah, have you how do you sort of crack that nut?
I'd be really interested why. Like, if they're not willing to use it, why is it that they're not willing to use it? Like, there's got to be an underlying reason. And I think sometimes there's a disconnect between what salespeople hear on calls and what marketing material is created. Like, I mean, to be honest, if it was me, I'd go back to a really basic level in terms of like, what is the challenge that what is the challenge that the consumer is having or the point of contact is having, and therefore your marketing should be addressing those challenges. And if they're not addressing those challenges, is that why they're not using it? Or like, salespeople are generally pretty resourceful, and they're going to do everything within their, they are often commission driven. They are often people who really, have a high drive to get those numbers. If they're not using it, there must be a reason. They wouldn't waste a material. And it could simply be understanding. Like, you almost need to unpick that a little bit further to kind of understand why she's asking the question. Because like, is it a particularly complicated industry whereby that's why they're not using it because it's too much detail? I'd like to know a little bit more, which I understand is a really passe question answer.
I wonder whether it comes back to what you were saying, Jake, where it was like contextualizing things. If a marketing team is coming up with all wonderful information, but the sales team go, I don't know what to do with this, then if you can help put it into their language.
Certainly, and I think I would +1 everything Hannah said there. I think that's really, really insightful. I can say salespeople are provided a lot of materials and a lot of resources, right? I think in most companies, everyone knows that having a sales role is hard. Being on a sales team is hard, and so they want to provide all these resources. But it is possible to oversaturate, and so that element of contextualization, I think, is really important. I think especially at a company where there's lots of different marketing teams that create lots of different pieces of content or collateral, I think it behooves those organizations to have a few folks say, okay, let's look at all this stuff. Does all this play well together? Does this all make sense together? Does a salesperson, can they look at all of this content and know what they should be using and when? So I think there is a volume element at play sometimes as well. That's not going to be true of all companies, but I've seen it happen before.
Yeah, I love that. There's a question. It was actually something that I wrote down that I think overlaps to do with training. So we've got a question about somebody that works in a very small company, and they say their marketing role absorbs some of the sales functions, which I think is probably quite common. This is Hannah's world. And is looking for any recommendations for some good basic training in sales. Mark, I guess you've got some resources, which if you wanted to send them over, we could include them in the email afterwards. I know HubSpot has a wonderful sort of training platform that I'm right thinking is free. Is that right, Mark? Yeah, that's free. Okay, so we could probably hook you up with some stuff there. But the things that I wrote down is people love a good book or a good email newsletter or a good resource. Like, have any of you, and this is open, maybe start with you, Hannah, is there anything that you've read or that you follow that you're like, that particular thing really helps me when it comes to understanding the relationship and understanding sales?
To be honest, and maybe this isn't my own fault. There is actually a company called Sixth Sense who have written a book called No More Cold Calls or Forms or Sales. I really rate that as like an approach to sales. I think it is probably the direction in which the industry of B2B sales is moving to some degree. And I think and most of their resources are free and their website's really good. But I would also probably just be looking for what type of approach you want to have. As in, Jake mentioned some earlier, like there's a number of different sales approaches you can have, and they're all quite different. If I was you, I'd be looking, researching those specific areas and finding out which one aligns with us best. Like being an account-based agency, we're inevitably going to be looking more towards the customer-centric kind of model and what can we do everything around that customer. But depending on what you're offering, depends on different. So I would, there's different cults. It's which cult you want to join.
Yeah, that's cool. Any resources from you two, or should we include it in the follow-up email? Oh, look at that, Mark! What a pro! He's already got the link in the chat.
I will. I've used some of these HubSpot, maybe not these ones, but some HubSpot resources before, and they are good. So I'll give a +1 there.
For clarity, this webinar was not sponsored by HubSpot, but we use it as well, and we absolutely love it. So yeah, highly recommend that you click that link. And
my last rec, my Bible is this book called Spin Selling, which was written decades ago by Neil Rackham. And I think it still holds true. Anytime I hire a new salesperson and they have never sold before, I have them read that book. Just a recommendation too.
That's great. That's really good. I love that. Well, look, we are at time. I'm just gonna, I'll put that up there. These are the 3 people that have been giving you all the wisdom today. And we really appreciate everything that you've done and delivered. There's still a bunch of open questions out there. That's Exclaimers Resources. Next week we have this is a series of talks around departments that aren't necessarily marketing. And so next week we've got Ryan Lisk, who's the founder of Hybrid Legal, and Vinay Palmer, who's the founder of Druva Star. So we're talking legal and customer success. So that'd be wonderful if you could join us next Tuesday. Again, we really appreciate all of you for joining today, and thank you all 3 of you for your time and your wisdom. And yeah, we will see you next week. Thanks, folks.
Thank you.
Cheers.